Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a Laval deck profile. So I'm really excited to do this for you guys because this was actually suggested to me by one of my patrons, Gloomba. And this deck is a really awesome hidden arsenal deck that makes some really amazing synchro plays. I love the way this deck plays. It reminds me a lot of the way that Synchrons play, and it's a really fun deck to play around with. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards like getting your name in the description of every single video, getting assigned cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month your patron along with test hands. And definitely give Gloomba some love down in the comments down below for suggesting such an awesome deck. So let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're playing 3 copies of Laval Handmaiden. So Laval Handmaiden is a great card in this deck and one of the key cards. What this card does is when this card is sent to the graveyard, if you have a Laval monster in the graveyard other than this card, then you can send a Laval monster from your deck to the graveyard. Usually what you're doing is you're using Molten Conduction Zone or Molten Conduction Field to be able to send this card plus another Laval monster to the graveyard to be able to then start looping all of these to the grave to get like 5 monsters in the graveyard to bring them back with Rekindling. We then play 3 copies of the level 2 tuner monster for Lavals. This card's pretty good because if you have 3 or more Laval monsters with different names in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, which is a great effect just to give you an additional monster on your side of the field to link climb and even go into some awesome synchro plays. We then play 2 copies of Laval Lakeside Lady. Lakeside Lady is a great level 3 tuner monster in deck. If this card's in the graveyard and you have 3 or more Laval monsters with different names in your graveyard, you can banish this card and 1 other Laval monster from your grave to target a set card your opponent controls and destroy that target, which is a good effect just to be able to get rid of a card on your opponent's side of the field. We then play 3 copies of Laval Archer. Laval Archer is a pretty neat card. I always love seeing this card in my hand because it helps me go into like cards like Needle Fiber in the deck. Because if this card is normal summoned during the main phase this turn, you can normal summon 1 Laval monster in addition to your normal summoner set. And you can only gain the effect of this card once per turn. And if this card's in your graveyard, you can target a fire monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card in defense position, but banish it when it leaves the field. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn, except fire monsters, and you can only use this effect of Laval Archer once per turn, which is a pretty good effect just to give you that additional play of summoning this card to your side of the field, and then special summoning out another copy, or normal summoning this side of your field, and then normal summoning another Laval tuner monster to your side of the field to get you an instant synchro play or get you into a link play, which is really, really good. We then play 3 copies of Laval Blaster. Laval Blaster is a really neat card in this deck, and it's actually a good way to mill cards to the graveyard because it has the ability that when this card is normal summon, if you have a Laval monster in your graveyard other than this card, then you can choose a number from 1 to 5 and then send that many cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard. And this card gains 200 attack for each Laval monster sent to the graveyard to activate this effect. This card works like a secondary Molten Conduction Field, which is really good just to give you that additional play. If you don't draw the Molten Conduction Field and you draw, say, like a Foolish Burial, this card helps out a lot just to get extra cards in the graveyard and kind of get you through the deck. We then play the same copy of Laval Magma Cannoneer. Cannoneer is just a level 4 with 200 defense, so you can special summon it back with your copy of Rekindling to help you go for some level 5 synchro plays. 1 copy of Lancelord. Lancelord is here because of the spell card, the Birth of the Prominence Flame, because you can use this card with a Lakeside Lady to go into Salamander, which is pretty good in this deck, and plus it has 200 defense, so you can bring it back with your copy of Rekindling. You play 2 copies of Red Resonator because you can normal summon this card to your side of the field, and then special summon another monster from your hand, which is pretty good, and it has 200 defense as well. So basically, as you're playing through this deck, you got to pay attention to the defense points of the monsters, because cards like Blaster have 800 defense, where like your copy of Red Resonator has 2, and you can't use special summon back this, but you can special summon back this with your copy of your Rekindling. We then play 2 copies of Boost Warrior as well. Boost Warrior is if you control a tuner, you can special summon this card from your hand, which is pretty good to be able to just get you another monster on your side of the field to link summon into Needle Fiber or to synchro summon into another monster. We then play 3 copies of Cyframe Gear Gamma and a single copy of Driver. The reason I play these in the deck is because they help out a lot with blocking your opponent from stopping you going for Rekindling and stopping your opponent from stopping you for going for Molten Conduction Field with hand traps. So this card really helps out to stop your opponent from hitting you with hand traps, and it's the reason I love this card as a 3 of in this deck. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Monster Reborn because Monster Reborn helps out in the deck a lot, is a great extender for the deck. It's kind of like all honesty, it's like a downgraded version of Rekindling for this deck, but it's still needed because it helps you get into certain plays and revive the exact monster you need when you need it. We then play a single copy of Reinforcements of the Army because Reinforcements of the Army is going to help you out a lot in this deck to get your copies of your Boost Warrior. We then play a single copy of Foolish Burial, which is kind of like Molten Conduction Field, but you only get to send one from the deck to the graveyard instead of two, but you get to send the exact one that you need to the graveyard when you need it. One copy of Resonator Call because it searches out our copies of Red Resonator and helps us thin the deck. 3 copies of Molten Conduction Field. This card is the awesome card of the deck. This card is one of the best cards in the entire deck that you want to see in every single hand. It sends 2 Laval monsters from your deck to the graveyard. So you're always going to send a copy of, say, Archer, or your copy of Cannoneer, and a copy of your Lakeside Lady, or your copy of Handmaiden to the graveyard to go into some really good plays. You're always going to usually summon or send this to the graveyard because she's going to let you send an additional one, which lets you send another one, and then another one to the graveyard. And then finally, you have all 3 of her in the graveyard and a copy of Cannoneer and Archer or Lord, depending on what your hand is. We then play 3 copies of Rekindling, which is the best card in the entire deck besides Molten Conduction Field. This card has the ability to let you special summon from your graveyard as many fire monsters as possible with 200 defense, but banish them during the end phase, which is not that big of a deal because you're usually going to use all those monsters anyways, so they're going to go back to the graveyard. This card is insanely good. It's like Soul Charge, but with fire monsters. There's so many cards in this deck that you can special summon with this card, and it's just an overall great card. If you open up Molten Conduction Field plus this, you've pretty much won the game because you're going to be able to go into some insanely powerful cards, which you guys will see in the test hands. We then play 3 copies of Birth of the Prominence Flame. This card is great because what this card does is it lets you synchro summon using monsters from your graveyard. It lets you target 2 fire monsters, 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner with 200 defense in your graveyard. Banish both those monsters if you do special summon a fire synchro monster from your extract whose level equals the total levels of those monsters, which is pretty good because depending on what you have, you can go for a 5, a 6, a 7, or an 8 in this particular deck because you have all those different levels with your Laval monsters to be able to go in for those really powerful synchro monsters. We then play 3 copies of Perform Pal Popper Up. The reason I play Popper Up in this deck is because you really need to get to your copies of Rekindling and Molten Conduction Field, but you also need to get your monsters into the graveyard. So Popper Up lets you send 3 cards, up to 3 cards from your hand to the graveyard, and then you draw the same number of cards that you sent to the graveyard. But for every one that you sent to the graveyard, you lose 1,000 life points because we don't play any copies of the Perform Pal Magicians or any of the Odd Eyes or any of the cards that we can special summon off this card, so you will be taking damage off this card's effect, which is a little bit bad, but at the same time you need to get those cards in the graveyard as quickly as possible. So this card really helps out. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the extra deck because we don't play any traps. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing a single copy Laval X-Lord. This card is really good in the deck when you can summon it. Usually you're just going for 2 5s and a 2 or 2 5s and a Needle Fiber to go into your copy of Cosmic Blazar, but this card's really good because it's really awesome as a walking gate, and it just recurs all your other monsters from the graveyard because it has the ability that when your opponent activates an effect of a monster on the field or in their hand, quick effect, you can destroy that monster, and if you do, inflict 1,000 points of damage to your opponent. And if this synchro summon card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon up to 3 non-synchro fire monsters with 200 defense from your graveyard and defense them, but negate their effects, which is really good just to get you more monsters back on your side of the field so you can go into more synchro plays, and it has 200 defense so you can bring it back with Rekindling. We then play a single copy of Laval Salamander. Salamander is just so good. It helps us out getting to draw cards because it has the ability that if this card is synchro summoned, then you get to draw 2 cards, and then if you have a fire monster in your hand, send 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard, including a fire monster, which helps us draw 2 to dig for the copy of Rekindling. And it also has the ability that otherwise you have to shuffle your entire deck back into the deck, which is not that big of a deal because we always are going to summon this card when we have a fire monster in the hand. Now, this is a really good effect that once per turn, you can banish a fire monster from your graveyard to change all face-up monster opponent controls into up to the number of Laval monsters you control into face-down defense, which makes Lakeside Lady even better in this deck because you can use her effect to get rid of a face-down card. We then play a single copy of Laval Dragon. Dragon is really good because it has the ability once per turn, add a Laval from your deck to your hand, and then send a Laval from your hand to the graveyard, so it can actually send the card that that you need from your hand into the graveyard and give you a search. So I just play this card as one of because I usually only ever summon it once. We then play a single copy of Dual Slasher because it's a level 5, so it helps us go into some really awesome plays, but it has a really neat effect that it gains effects equal to the number of Laval monsters in your graveyard. If you have +2, then once per turn, if this card attacks a defense position monster, it can attack again in a row. And if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflicts piercing damage to your opponent if you have 3 or more with different names, which is a really good effect. The same copy of Laval Dragon. Laval Dragon is a level 5, so pretty much you're playing this card to go into Blazar Dragon, but it has the ability also that you can shuffle 2 Laval monsters from your graveyard into your main deck, then target 1 card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. It's not once per turn, so it can just bounce over and over and over again, so it's really good to clear the way for OTKs. Play a single copy of Satellite Warrior because this deck can just synchro summon like crazy. So playing this card in the deck is a no-brainer because basically you're going to be able to summon this card, be able to pop a bunch of cards on the field, and get you a really powerful big boss monster to OTK your opponent. 1 copy of Crystal Wing because it negates monster effects, and it's pretty easy to actually summon in this deck. 1 copy of F.A. Dawn Dragster. Dragster is really good because it negates spell and traps. 1 copy of Stardust Charge Warrior because it lets you draw a card, which is really good upon synchro summon. TG Hyper Librarian, you're always summoning this card in this deck first because you want to be able to draw every time you synchro summon. So this card is an absolute must one of in the deck. 1 copy of Metal Marcher, because Metal Marcher gets you plays that you normally wouldn't get because you can summon out the level 2 onto your side of the field of the Vol monsters, and then summon out like a Boost Warrior to summon this, and then get your copy of your Tuner back to your side of the field, which helps us go in for additional plays in this deck because it gets us a Synchro Tuner monster on our side of the field, which really helps out in this deck. 1 copy of Formula Synchron because it's going to let us draw a card, and it lets us Synchro Summon during our opponent's turn to summon our most powerful boss monster in the extra deck, which is a single copy of Cosmic Blazar Dragon. And you guys will see in the test hands exactly how to summon this card, but basically you're using 2 level 5s plus Formula Synchron to actually summon this card. But what it does is it has some really awesome effects. That if your opponent activates any of these cards' effects, you can banish this card, quick effect, and then special summon it back during the end phase. When your opponent activates a card or effect, negate the activation if you destroy this card, but you have to banish this card to activate any of these effects. When your opponents would summon a monster, negate the summon of those monsters and destroy those monsters. And when an opponent's monster declares an attack, negate the attack, and then in the battle phase. And when you banish it for its effects to activate, you do get to special summon it back during the end phase, which is a great effect. We then play a single copy of Skull Dread because you play so many monsters in the deck with different names, and it's so easy with Rekindling to summon a bunch of monsters with different names, and this card helps you dig for additional Rekindlings. And then we play a single copy of Needle Fiber as well, because Needle Fiber is fantastic in this deck to actually summon to your side of the field to summon Formula during your opponent's turn, and then use Formula with 2 level 5s to go into your copy of Cosmic Blazar. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. Definitely give Gloomba some love down in the comments down below, and tell me what you think of this deck down there in the comments. And if you guys want to see the test hands, they will be out on the channel, so you guys should totally check those out because this deck is an absolutely crazy deck. I'm really glad that Gloomba actually suggested this deck because it is super, super fun, guys. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.